and wanted to give everyone a warm welcome again. I'm sure we'll have folks join us as the hour progresses, but welcome to the January Journal Club for the Digital Medicine Society. When work hits home, the cancer treatment journey of a clinical scientist driving digital medicine. My name is Sarah Sheehan. I'm a program lead here at the Digital Medicine Society, joined by several DIME colleagues, and want to offer a warm welcome to each of you joining us from external organizations. I'd also like to pass it over to my colleague Lynette to introduce our speaker for today and generally walk over some housekeeping notes, and we'll move forward from there. Lynette, I'd like to invite you to welcome everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. Again, echo the warm welcome. If you haven't joined a DIME Journal Club meeting, this is a format where we invite you to ask any question of our speaker, knowing that we've done the work of picking articles that we find particularly compelling and authors that we feel that you would really enjoy speaking with. So with that, again, I'll introduce myself, Lynette Demers. I lead the Impact program at DIME, which is the Virtual First Care program. And honestly, I feel like I'll be taking a back seat here and really just enjoying the conversation and chiming in. And really, as participants on the line, it's your job to really provide the questions, although of course I have a lot. I'm going to move to the housekeeping slide now, just so you know the rules of play here. So actually, let me first introduce Elena before we go on. So I invite our colleague, Elena Izmailova, who has written an incredible paper about her journey that she will talk to you about. There's lots of learnings in there. And, you know, from my part as also a cancer survivor, I'm just absolutely blown away by the personal story. And I think that makes it particularly compelling. Elena is the Chief Scientific Officer of Conexa Health. And she's also, thank you very much, Elena, a founding member of our, what's it called here? Chime in, Sarah, I've forgotten the founding member.
The newly formed Founding Members Council of DIME.
Founding Members Council, that's right. Yeah. So Elena's role on that council is to guide our research agenda and really help provide some of that North Star for DIME. So let's move on to housekeeping. Apologize for that. Okay, so housekeeping. So as you saw, we're recording this, and this meeting will be posted on our website. And I know many of you will have colleagues who are interested in checking it out later. I expect we'll also probably write up this interview because it's going to be really interesting. As you can see on the slide here, we invite you to ask questions at any time during this presentation. So you can do that by putting your hand up. You know how to do that, not live, but using the little hand up button at the bottom of your screen, or you can type your question into the chat, and we will either answer it live or preferably give you the option to unmute yourself and allow you to ask the question live. So I think that's the gist of it, right? Did I miss anything? Housekeeping? Let's move on to the presentation. So with that, this is really a conversation between my colleague Sarah, who runs our newest program that's launched in oncology. So she knows a lot about research design and policy around clinical studies, and has dived feet first into our oncology project, and Elena, who's the author of this. So I'll just let Elena take over and tell us what she's done.
Thanks, right. I think we've worked it out where I'll give just a short description of the paper and then jump into conversation with Elena about its findings and implications for the field overall. So really appreciate the introduction. Again, my name is Sarah Sheehan. I'm a program lead here at the Digital Medicine Society with a background in clinical trial innovation and the integration of research and care, with a new focus in oncology, which has much relevance to this particular paper, and of course, upcoming work at DIME that we'll promote here at the end. And you're all welcome to get involved in as part of your organizations. But what I've done before I give this brief overview is dropped a link to the paper in the chat so that you all have it handy. And if you need a refresh, can look at this paper while I kind of walk through its key points. So Elena, please feel free to add in at the end. Of course, you're the expert here. So I'll jump in with a few points of overview and then we can move forward. The paper, which you have the link to, was published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology last September and describes the personal and professional journey of our colleague Elena after a recent cancer diagnosis and subsequent treatment. After treatment, Elena assembled a digital kit at home, enabling the collection of baseline and post-treatment vital sign and physical activity data. She kept a diary and reviewed the wearable data, sharing the results with treating physicians to improve the care she received. Elena and her co-author, Robert Ellis, then set about analyzing the data against two hypotheses. The first being, can a simple combination of measures and thresholds identify days or periods of time when the patient was unwell? And the second being, is this data set unique to a particular patient for the time frame under consideration, or can the threshold findings be corroborated by normative data sets? So over the next hour, we'll explore the findings of the study and discuss their implications of the field for digital medicine more broadly. We'll also hear firsthand from Elena about how and why her care differed from the standard of care of the average cancer patient. And finally, and importantly, we'll also discuss what kinds of investments that we need to make in infrastructure and other dimensions to enable us to derive actionable insights from the wealth of continuously generated health data that we produce in our clinics and at home. Through wearables and other sensor-based technologies. Our ability to do what Elena did, as you read in the study, inclusively and at scale, can really set us up to improve care for other patients the way that it improved Elena's. So before we jump in, anything to add, Elena, on that brief overview of the paper? And of course, we'll get into findings and insights.
Thank you, Sarah. This is a wonderful introduction of the paper, and thank you for inviting me today to present this paper and share my, frankly, personal experience as a patient. It was very illuminating to be on the receiving end of care and fully understanding what is to be a patient. So Sarah and I going to structure our presentation / conversation as an interview and presentation at the same time. Sarah will ask me questions and I will share with you the highlights of the paper as well as my personal experience. But if you have any burning questions, you want to make a point, feel free to raise your hand and we will weave your questions in the conversation. So I'm starting with our first slide. Sarah, back to you.
Yes, thanks so much, Elena. And I echo that. We invite you to chime in via the chat box or raise your hand, and you can unmute yourself to ask questions of Elena as we move through. But I'll start out first to kick things off. And really, Elena, before we jump in to the study itself, I'd like to briefly set the stage and touch base on the actual and potential utility of digital health technologies to support remote patient monitoring and further evidence generation and clinical decision-making in the ways that you see here on the screen. So could you talk us through the applications of these DHTs across the cancer treatment life cycle? I think as we see here, they're helpful across multiple dimensions, including diagnosis, assessing treatment efficacy, and of course, remote patient monitoring to capture events in the post-acute care setting. Could you kind of walk us through how they help here generally?
So it's an excellent question, Sarah. And the table you see here, it's actually from my own paper that was published, became available online literally as I was heading into the surgery room after receiving a diagnosis of suspected cancer. And my patient journey started based on this knowledge that I published with Dr. Wood, who is also one of the founding members of Digital Medicine Society, where we critically reviewed the literature and identified where digital health technologies can help in cancer clinical trials or care delivery, and there are multiple applications. There are also multiple ways of measuring certain concepts, diagnosis, risk prognosis, treatment efficacy. You can do it by means of patient-reported outcomes that more and more are being collected electronically, and so they're also DHT enabled, or by biometric monitoring technologies that we designated in the V3 paper that everyone knows as sensor-based DHTs. Essentially, it is a digital sensor and the data processing algorithms. And I'm showing here measurement examples. You can do physical function, you can collect quality of life, or you can collect certain physiological measures like vital signs, VO2 max, or heart rate variability. And here I would like to connect the two and share with you how my own journey started. It was actually very simple. I headed for regular colonoscopy screening. The only indication for that screening was my age, because after a certain age, the risk of colorectal cancer increases and people asked to do the screening procedures. I didn't think much of it. I just wanted to get it done. I didn't have family history of it. I didn't have any symptoms and a lifestyle that many doctors would call healthy. Everything looked fine. I woke up after the procedure and I saw the doctor sitting by my bedside and pointing out to the monitor and saying, "It looks like you have cancer." And there was a huge tumor on sitting in my colon. It was the endoscopic photograph. And in that moment, the world I used to live in got shattered. If you or your significant others were unfortunate to be in a similar circumstances, you know that these moments are psychologically very difficult. There was a lot of uncertainty in terms of prognosis, and it's not usually established until the tumor is taken out and the staging is defined, which basically is predictive of survival, or in plain terms, how many years the patient might live. And my entire life flashed in front of my eyes like fast forward video. And it became very clear what was important to me and what was optional. It became very clear that the cause of digital medicine and my professional commitment was clearly important. And I believed in what I was doing, which led me, like, if I have written the paper where you see the table on the screen, then it must have value. If it has value, this is my opportunity to test what I have written and what I was talking into multiple forums, including digital medicine. It's true. And to do that, as Sarah mentioned to you, I assembled my own kit of digital devices, selected the measures to start my patient journey. Back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elena. I think it's an incredibly compelling story of really bravery and perseverance and passion. And, I know I speak for, I think, everyone on this call when I say we admire what you've done here and how you jumped into action in the face of something I think really, I think is really scary, right? So it's really nice to hear from you about your patient journey and how it kind of led to the genesis of this particular study and your motivations for the study. And I want to return to the kind of the maturity and uptake of approaches like remote patient monitoring and using the devices that you selected, right, commercially available ones and medically cleared ones by the FDA. But I think we can do that a little bit later on in the talk here. And it makes sense now, I think, to talk particularly about how you chose the digital measures that were important to you. You mentioned the measures, heart rate variability and physical activity measures that you selected for tracking as part of the study, and really kind of what selection criteria were important to you as a patient. And if you could tell us what you learned about the use of commercially available devices as a patient and a researcher, and how it benefited or did not benefit you to use both commercially available devices and devices that have been cleared by the FDA to help track outcomes post-treatment. So a lot of questions there, and maybe we can start out with measurement selection and move on to device selection.
Okay, that's a really good logical sequence. So essentially, from my knowledge of the field and my experience, I knew that monitoring vital signs would be important to monitor myself in post-surgical recovery, because this is how the standard of care is delivered in the hospital post surgery, and the monitoring vital signs would be important to see potentially early signs of complications like potentially allergic reactions, infections, etc. And that's why it's being done. The other part that I did, I used two fitness trackers, one in the form of the ring, and the other one was a wrist-worn fitness trackers. And this is not a part of standard of care. It doesn't have any proxies on the hospital side. And I knew that it would be important to monitor physical activity, because it could be a clear indication of how well I will do, and monitoring, as I will elaborate further, it is an important measure of how patient is doing, and progression in terms of frequency of adverse effects of the treatments and potentially hospitalizations. Just to mention briefly, as you all know, DIME has a project on physical activity measures, and extremely important work. Please, if you haven't joined this project, stay tuned about the results of this project, because I'm positive that it's going to help in multiple therapeutic areas. Now, to the second part of your question, Sarah, how did I choose between medical devices and fitness trackers? So all devices that I used for vital sign monitoring were medical devices. I don't claim that I did spend a lot of time and did due diligence, which I recommend, including my own publications, to see the quality of data. My approach was very simple. It's what is available directly to consumer. And I could just get online, because it was only a few week time between when I received a diagnosis and when I was heading for my surgery. And from my own experience, I knew that it would be very important to baseline myself, because this is N of 1 study, and the only thing I can compare myself to is myself early on. That's how I came up. If I spent more time and put more thought, probably I would come up with a different choice of devices, but the kit that you see here and the description, if you need a detailed one, is in the paper. And for pulse oximeters, it's really important to select the ones that have received the FDA clearance because the bar is higher and these devices go through most rigorous treatments. The same, the all blood pressure monitors, the clearance is required for marketing a device. With thermometers, it can be variable, but I selected a patch one that collected data continuously, and I will tell you a little bit more of it. And the fitness trackers, the stuff that I was looking most is a daily step count, and somewhat the watch allowed also ambulatory heart rate that turned out to be interesting. And my journey, just to describe it briefly here, it was diagnosis, collecting the baseline, going to the hospital to have the tumor removal. It was a major surgery. Part of my colon was removed completely with all draining lymph nodes, and the vasculature was rewired. It's a miracle what modern surgeons can do. It's almost unbelievable. It's truly a miracle of modern medicine. I didn't use devices in the hospital because patients are being asked to leave valuables at home, and some of these are considered jewelry, believe it or not. And then I started monitoring myself again when I got home, just in case if you are worried about me, I'm doing fine. Thank you for your thoughts and wishes. The surgery went well. I recovered well, and the tumor turned to be an early stage, and I didn't need follow-up treatments like chemo, which was a possibility at the time of diagnosis because the tumor was very large, 8 centimeters in the largest dimension.
Yeah. Thanks, Elena. That's really helpful. And it's good to hear you walk through, from point A to point B, the collection of baseline data, and of course, the continuous collection of data as you recovered from surgery. So really what I'm hearing is the supplementary data collection that was enabled by the commercial technologies because they were available to you was helpful, right? In terms of, I think you mentioned in the paper, there were some redundancies in the data that was collected, but it was helpful to see both and cooperate both to make your case and present to your treating physicians. What can you maybe put in your own words what you think are the advantages of continuous data collection, especially through enabled through the use of wearable devices that are commercially available to almost anyone?
That's a good question. So when I was in the hospital, one thing that I learned, and very quickly, that the biggest challenge for people who are recovering from major medical procedures is to sleep in the hospital. The vital sign monitoring is going round the clock every 3 hours. It means that people are woken up several times at night. And hospital is a noisy environment. There's some monitors attached to patients, and in my private room, which is normally the case, it means the medical personnel comes to attend both patients. So it's really not possible to sleep more than 2 hours in a row, and it's round the clock. It can exhaust even a healthy person. And this monitoring is a necessity, as I said before. Early changes in vital sign like blood pressure or body temperature can predict potential complications and prevent them. It's really important. But when I got home, the thing that I did is started essentially doing the same thing with these medical devices that the hospital was doing. And the biggest revelation to me as a scientist, and in previously, including my own publication, we discussed how much of a burden would be to a patient to do what I was doing. Well, compared to staying at the hospital, it's not a burden at all. These devices are designed to be easy to use. It's easy to see the numbers in a app, in a cell phone app, but my favorite one from all 5 of them was the temperature patch. I could put it on myself under the armpit and sleep through the entire night, open it in the morning and see if my temperature was elevated. That was it. There was no alarm clocks, no need for caregiver attention unless I was not feeling well otherwise, and I just could do it. It was so easy and simple, and doing pulse oximetry and blood pressure a few times a day, it's easy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think patient burden, of course, here is something that we'll cover later on as a benefit to remote and continuous patient monitoring. And I think what I'm getting from your personal experience, and of course from our take on the literature more broadly, and from what we know about you know, the experiences of our subject matter experts around the table here and outside, is that, you know, remote and continuous data collection provides more rich and robust and holistic data for decision makers across the spectrum, like clinicians, like patients, right, who are managing their own care, obviously very proactively like you. But it also might, you know, accrue health benefits to patients, right, who need rest and recovery, and do not want to give up any time and energy to additional measurement, you know, points and interactions, right, when they could be using that time and energy to devote to rest and recovery to improve their own health outcomes. So I think multiple benefits here that you see in an N of 1 study that, you know, we hope that the literature can expand and explore going forward. But I think maybe, Elena, it might make sense to kind of move forward from the patient journey side of things to talk about kind of some of the findings and insights from your study, and broadly discuss implications for the field of oncology and generally of digital medicine. And so I think, you know, what's displayed here about digital monitoring, we know from the implementation of digital monitoring that it can help improve patient access to care, right? The accessibility portion here of commercially available devices, and of course, you know, care at home, preventing and decreasing patient burden associated with care delivery and with research visits. And we know it can also improve the richest of data available to clinicians for decision support. So I have a two-part question here. So I'd love to hear about how your study experience highlights this, right? I think we covered that in the, you know, access to care, decreased patient burden portion, but I'd love to hear more about the richness of data piece that we touched on here. And then as a, you know, kind of flow into the rest of discussion, I'd love to talk about the maturity of the adoption and uptake of these digital health solutions, because we know oncology is lagging in digital innovation, right? We care so much about keeping patients healthy during treatment and post-treatment, and really care a lot about keeping them out of the hospital after they go home, given what's happening to their immune systems. But we have, I think, in a limited way, and are maybe only starting to adopt some of these digital health technologies that can really facilitate some of these at-home research interactions or care visits, and things like that. So if you could start from the, you know, study perspective about how your experience highlights the ability to get more rich data for decision making through remote patient monitoring, and then lead into maybe why, in your view, some of these technologies haven't been adopted in the same way in oncology as they have in other therapeutic contexts.
Okay, very good questions. So let's start with my experience. Actually, I was very comfortable with remote care delivery. I think it has huge advantages, especially for people who are frail, have difficulties moving, and it was definitely a huge benefit during the pandemic when going to the hospital was increasing the chance of catching the COVID infection. I had to go to the hospital after the discharge post-surgery only for blood work and imaging. That was it. the rest of can be done remotely. And I was very comfortable because I had my own set with devices, and due to my professional background, I knew what to do with the data. In a sense, it made me feel empowered. It made me feel part of the team. It's not me just sitting and waiting for the next hospital visits, for the next conversation with doctor. I felt like I was working actively alongside and generating my own insights that, as appropriately, I went and brought to attention of my treating physicians, which was great. And I said that using these 5 devices, it sounds like a lot, was actually not difficult. With a caveat that, of course, I'm not an average patient and my digital literacy is probably higher than the population average. But nevertheless, I assume that everyone can learn. And eventually, if people are committed, they essentially can do the same thing. I also would like to go back to your second questions, is like, how far is from what I did, from the care delivery, and what it would take to make it more ubiquitous, that your average patient can enjoy the same level of digital care and data care. Let's put it this way. So prior to pandemic, we analyzed actually what it would do to do remote vital sign monitoring, including cardiac monitoring. And what we concluded that essentially it needs to become similar to what we see with our own lab tests. If you go to a lab in the hospital, you provide a biospecimens, so certain tests are being done. And if you have an online account with a hospital, in your dashboard, you see what was the result, what is a normal range, and whether your data is within the normal range or it's deviating and requires medical attention. Essentially, that's what we need to do for remote vital signs. And we need to be creative how we are going to display them, averages, certain deviation in certain point of time. It has not quite been figured out. The way how I did it, essentially, I looked at the numbers in the apps linked to these devices, wrote down the numbers, and used my judgment if I had to bring it to attention of treating physicians. For instance, I lost blood after the surgery and I was anemic for a while. And when I was discussing with my doctor, I said, yeah, yesterday I was walking on the street, it was a little bit uphill and my heart rate was 145. And the doctor said, oh, let's consider an iron infusion because this is serious. If I haven't done it, I don't know how much longer I would wait for an infusion and would I act on it or not. But the doctor was also confident because they knew my background and it seemed like the cause was plausible and it was aligned with the lab test. So it's a totality of the data. But what we need is to have the same dashboard for digital measures as we have for lab or imaging tests, where everyone can log in and quickly, within minutes, literally, because that's how much time the doctor has. The standard allocated time is 15-20 minutes to see a patient, fill the medical record, and review everything from symptoms to imaging to lab tests and now digital. It has to be quick. It has to be handy. We are not there yet, but it's possible. The other thing is physical activity, fitness trackers. When I got home, my daily step count was 313 steps a day. If you don't know what it is, it's extremely low. When I was in the hospital, actually, the medical personnel knew that it would be important to walk, and they say, we encourage you to walk 3 times a day, and we will record it by hand on a whiteboard in your room how many times you walked and how far. I came home. I don't have a big house. I don't have a long corridor like in the hospital. I need support to walk after the surgery, and that result in 13 steps per day. But from my own research done with Dr. Nitin Ori at Montefiore Medical Center, Department of Radiology, I knew that 1,000 reduction in daily step count per day for cancer patients who undergo chemoradiotherapy is a whopping HR and increasing the odds of being hospitalized. People who stay physically active don't end up in the hospital, and they complete their treatments on time, which is really important. And if we are looking into more conventional measures like what we see here, performance status, that basically assesses physician rating scale, assessing physician fitness or quality of life, they actually don't predict who is going to get hospitalized. But daily step counts is extremely accurate, dynamic predictor of hospitalizations.
Yeah, obviously something well supported by the literature. Yeah, absolutely. Including in your papers, right? And I want to return to some of the points you made about patient engagement and the benefits of this type of data collection for extending access to higher quality care, right? And of course, you were a benefactor of that higher quality care that extended from your data collection, your proactive data collection as an engaged patient. But we want to make sure that this is the standard of care, right, for oncology and cancer patients and patients more broadly, as we move forward and as the technologies and really kind of the education level and the trust level in these technologies evolves to support more widespread use. So it's clear that there are gaps, right, because all of this data collection was self-driven on your behalf, Elena. There are gaps that need to be filled on the care provider side, right? And I wondered if you could talk specifically about. I know you touched on the lack of dashboards to kind of aggregate and present this data to the clinician team so they can make quick decisions to improve patient care. Are there other gaps that you experienced that you obviously undertook data collection to fill? And then beyond that, how can we do that at scale? Right, this is an N of 1 study. This is a patient level, improvement of health outcomes. How do we do that at the population level?
Really good question. So as I mentioned, a lot of my data collection was manual. It's just looking in the app and writing down the numbers and kind of analyzing them based on what I know. But to enable this on a larger scale, you can't expect every patient to do accurately what I did. It requires essentially a data integration platform, the same way the data from devices should flow as it flows from the lab or the imaging center. And it should be connected to populate the patient data dashboard with appropriate data analytics of summarizing the data, highlighting times, data points outside of normal range to be discussed further. The other thing, as I mentioned, it should be presented that the physician in a few minutes left should look at it and quickly able to make a decision. And accessibility of technologies. I got this on my own account, but the other part that the technologies have to be affordable or reimbursable by the health insurance.
Yeah. I think that makes good sense and really highlights the access piece that we'd like to close out, I think, the conversation with today in a few minutes. And of course, want to also loop back on the data integration, the interpretability and the shareability dimensions that you mentioned are so important for allowing, obviously, patients to control their own data, participate in their own care, and for clinicians to use the wealth of continuously generated health data that patients are, providing and developing outside of the system interaction to better inform care. And I'd love to wrap up with a discussion on maybe the kind of discrete and unique points of infrastructure investment and improvement that we need to make to scale what your study did here to larger populations to improve, population health outcomes. I think before, the data sharing slide is particularly relevant here. I think that maybe we can just discuss back up a little bit and discuss the kind of measurement side of things, right? So we've discussed extensively the utility of digital health tools and remote patient monitoring broadly as a concept for engagement, decreased burden of care and participation in research, and of course improved health outcomes, right, by providing clinical decision support to clinical teams in real time. But the kind of the results of your study really tie into other parts of the literature on the clinical utility of these tools to measure digital endpoints, and including the paper that you've referenced before. So given that, what during the course of your study, were you surprised by any portion of presenting the data to the clinicians? Were they familiar with the digital endpoints that you were using, and did they know how to integrate them into the course of their decision making to provide this higher quality care to you?
All good points. Clinicians didn't expect it because that's normally not what patients do. They were very open-minded and receptive, and I already trained some of them. The certain visits started with a question, what data do you have today? Not how are you feeling today, but what data do you have today? That's how far we went. They were receptive to it. They were open discussing these data, but in order to make it ubiquitous, again, it needs to be standard of care, and we need normative data sets. I'm showing here my data and selected variables that we found to be very useful in terms of continuous monitoring. And as you can see, from day to day, the data is noisy, but directionally, if you look, it goes in the right direction. The resting heart rate has decreased, the heart variability has increased, and daily step count is increased. That's basically the desired outcome for every patient who is going through a similar journey. But in order to make this work and enable physicians leveraging this data, we need normative data sets beyond N of 1 from gender and age matching populations that can be used as a reference set for physicians to make a decision if a certain data for a certain date or certain time period is actionable.
Yeah. Thanks, Elena. And obviously, many efforts underway and probably many more needed to increase the uptake of digital endpoints in the oncology space, and of course, enrich data collection more broadly, right, on baseline measures, as you mentioned here. I think we have figures floating around somewhere that there are hundreds of digital endpoints included in trials to assess treatment efficacy across many therapeutic areas, but not one in oncology. So there's much more work to do, I think, to increase the uptake on the research side, of course, and the comfortability of digital endpoints for trialists in the same way as there is for providers and clinicians to use them to inform clinical decision making. I think this is really helpful, and that the slide you're showing on the screen is also helpful. I think that I want to bring it back to the bigger picture about how we can make this possible for patients who aren't as engaged or aren't as expert as you in their own care and of course in clinical research. So I think my main question here is, what would really have improved the ability of your care team to collect and use data from these digital solutions without, kind of your proactive activity in that space? Are there different, beyond education, of course, there's lack of familiarity. Are there different dimensions that would really help this move more towards the provider side so that we can get them acting on a more robust and higher resolution data set to make care decisions?
So if I have to pick and choose three main factors, it's a platform that would enable data collection. It could be a commercial platform. It could be a hospital platform, but it should be a place where these data are going to be collected, not apocryphal stories, by patients, that the doctors can reliably review the data. Second one, creating large normative data sets and sharing them, that people can go study, investigate, and draw conclusions, and create tools to have means to interpret the data. Because we can collect terabytes of data after terabyte, but if the data is not interpretable, it's just space in the server.
Sure. Yeah, back to that interoperability, interpretability, shareability dimension. And I think we've landed on the right slide here. And of course, even though your study was a small sample size, right, an N of 1, there are several lessons learned from researchers, providers, and patients, right? And I think we can kind of move towards closing out about with the recommendations that you might give to help us make progress in this space, right? So you just mentioned 3, right? Platforms for enhancing our ability to share data across these different stakeholders and decision makers across the cancer treatment lifecycle, investment in baseline data collection, large normative data sets that we can use to compare and use in our studies, obviously. And then, I think moving forward on the provider side, how can we ensure that this is done at scale, right? I think this is dashboards are easy and to use, I think, depending on how they're designed for maybe the individual clinician, to the extent that they get familiar with them and are used to incorporating them in standard of care for their patients. What do we do about making sure that we're enabling and extending access to these types of technologies integrated into care for as many patients as possible? So this is the scalability factor here.
It is scalability, but it's also an education factor.
Sure.
I think Digital Medicine Society plays a pivotal role in raising awareness and educating scientific community of how important digital data is and what it can enable. Just the crowdsourcing for Endpoint initiative, a number of DIME projects, including physical activity, including nocturnal scratch. There are many more super important projects, but what it does, it basically educates the community why doing this is important. Why should we change the way how care delivered, how clinical trials are done to create better experience for patients and more powerful tool to enable better medicine, better diagnostics, and better care.
Yeah, I like this kind of circular learning healthcare system approach to the use of digital health technologies to support across the cancer treatment spectrum. And we know, particularly for this therapeutic context, right, a lot of times the only option for treatment is experimental treatment through or investigational therapies, right? Putting a patient on a clinical trial protocol. And I want to touch on this. So there are 2 aspects of this, right? So there are, how are we using digital health technologies to help us enroll and conduct cancer clinical trials? And I want to talk about maybe a little bit of infrastructure investment needed there from your perspective. And I also want to talk about the type of data we're generating as part of continuous monitoring, right? We're generating real world data that we turn into real world evidence to, of course, inform real-time decision making. So I also wanted to maybe close out with the implications of your study for the applicability of RWD and RWE at scale in clinical decision making. So maybe we'll tackle the first part first, right? I apologize for these compound questions, so I'll split it back up. But the infrastructure investment needed to help us enroll and better conduct clinical trials in the cancer space. Could you briefly touch on maybe the insights from your study that would help support recommendations for infrastructure investment in clinical research?
So essentially, I would say that we need more examples and more population level examples of the data utility to convince clinical trial sponsors that we need more data outside of traditional endpoints as progression-free survival and frequency of adverse events in the active versus control arm. Because fundamentally what I shared with you is a patient-centric approach. This is about quality of life of patients, is about maximizing the chances for good outcomes, and also extrapolating the data and understanding its generalizability by comparing to normative data sets. If we take this three-prong approach, then we have a good chance to do something different instead of yet another therapy, yet another clinical trial focusing primarily on survival. I also would like to add that the regulators and the FDA in particular are very interested in learning more from patient-generated data and how to capture patient quality of life and functionality. Essentially, what I'm describing here is a functional status 24/7. How to assess how patients functions, not just survives, beyond survival. Survival is important, but how patient functions in the context of a specific treatment, experimental or standard of care.
Yeah, absolutely. A huge opportunity for continuous data to help inform those core clinical and quality of life measures that exist outside of the objective survive, not survive, right? Or survive for a number of years. And these quality measures, I think, are certainly important, and certainly our ability to use digital health tools to measure digital endpoints continuously paves way for us to collect more rich data in that space. I think that's a great answer, and it makes sense that the three dimensions you mentioned before are equally as supportive of care as they are of research, especially when we're thinking about how to better integrate care and research in the oncology space to provide high quality care to as many people as possible, right? I want to close out with this one last piece and give you a chance to obviously offer your closing remarks. And I haven't seen any questions jump in the chat, but I do want to obviously turn it over to the audience to open it up for further discussion. So any kind of quick thoughts on what this means for the utility of RWE and RWD in clinical and regulatory decision making? Does this mean that we're on a pathway to better trust the quality of data collected continuously, and to use that to inform decision making on a population level?
This is really complex, and I think trust directly is related to the quality of data and the outcomes, because all patients care at the end of the day is outcome, is how long they live and what's the quality of life, how much life they can enjoy in the lifespan that they can provide. I think that's the most important link with the patient community. And here is probably a first glimpse how some of these data can provide the insights.
Yeah. I think it's a great point, right? Fit for purpose measurement is important here, and we need to know what endpoints to select, because to match kind of dimensions of interest, right? Measures of interest that have clinical and quality of life utility in our studies. I think we could probably host a whole other meeting on what this means for the utility and applicability of RWE in clinical and, of course, regulatory decision making. But I want to stop it here and open it up to the group around the table to jump in with any questions for you, Elena, before we have to close out. So do folks on the line have questions for Elena? All right, just leaving some silence here. Smit has an observation in the chat. Yeah, I think Smit, obviously this is extremely relevant to DIME's endpoints library, and kind of the lack of uptake of digital endpoints in the oncology space in particular, despite the fact that this can provide, high resolution information about patients in terms of core clinical and quality of life measures. So really well put. And I think that we'd probably offer up our emails, and maybe Elena, if you're open to it, your emails for any follow-up questions from the crowd around the table here. But really wonderful to speak with you about this paper, and of course your experience and insights that you gained as a patient and a researcher throughout the course of the work you undertook in the post-treatment setting. I want to give you a chance to just offer closing thoughts, and then I have a couple of housekeeping slides that we'd like to mention. There are conversations ahead of us in the new year that DIME is hosting on several different topics, and I'll cue those up after you close this out, Elena. Thanks again, of course.
So what I would like to do is to close it with words of gratitude, that I'm extremely thankful for everyone who supported me through this journey, including the members of Digital Medicine Society. I'm very grateful to my family and friends who reached out and say anything we can do for you, and just being there. I'm more than grateful to outstanding teams of physicians and nurses who were with me for this journey, supported me in all possible way, provided outstanding care, and were receptive to this little experiment that I was doing. Nobody said, no, you shouldn't be doing it, or the data is not correct. They were open-minded. And I'm also grateful that I live in modern times when methods of preventive screening make cancer a curable condition for many patients.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Our note of thanks to you as well. And it's really nice to, kind of leave off on that note of inspiration and optimism. Obviously a big community helps. And of course, modern medicine helps a lot as well. And, we really, really appreciate you joining us today to share about your experience. And, we hope that we obviously will continue working with you, but we hope to, that this, kind of supports collaboration across the DIME community more broadly. I just want to share my screen here briefly, because we have a couple of other events like this coming up, and the first being on February 1st is another DIME webinar, kind of similar in format to this, but with stakeholders from Intel and Canon Medical and Oracle to discuss how digital product teams can deliver groundbreaking solutions in an innovative and equitable way. And then the second event I'd like to mention here is another virtual journal club on the applicability of AI in healthcare in resource poor settings. That's on February 9th. So that'll be our February journal club. So my note of thanks again to Elena and to my colleague Lynette, who co-planned this event. I'm going to stop sharing slides here and take us back to the Zoom screen. But thank you again to each of you for joining us. If you have any questions for Elena or for DIME, please reach out. Our emails are on the screen. And Elena's is connected to the org ID, I think, in the on the paper in the JCO. So really, really appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us. And please don't forget to tune back in for those webinars and journal clubs upcoming. Thanks again, everyone. And thanks, Elena, especially.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.